Let's go to the home of, is it common sense? Are any party conferences common sense? Let's get to talk presenter and, of course, political commentator Peter Carball, who was at Tory conference in Birmingham. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Are you getting much common sense there?
I think it's probably more in your studio, Julia, than here necessarily. Although, in fairness, I did go to Tom Tugendhat and Kemi Badenoch's Q&A yesterday, and there were a few things said there that did seem to make some sense. And then today, of course, it'll be Robert Jenrick and James Cleverly who will make their points to the party faithful here in Birmingham. But yeah, the mood is actually slightly better than I thought it would be. When you're at rock bottom, the only way is up. As someone once said, things can only get better.
Yes, indeed. It is extraordinary. We were talking to Ian Duncan Smith a little bit earlier, how there's actually, the mood was very much not a victory lap at Labour last week, and yet this week in Birmingham and Tory party conference, actually people seem to be quite chipper. And it is interesting that we actually are seeing some quite interesting debates coming out. A little bit of infighting as well coming in the Tory leadership contest. I was fascinated by this YouGov poll for Sky News as well, which showed that Robert Jenrick is very much closing the gap with Kemi Badenoch among Tory party members. So talk us through sort of where all the candidates stand in relation to the MPs, who of course get a say in 2 ballots next week, but also where they stand with party members who get the final say.
Yeah, there is a slightly weird situation where the MPs decide next week on Wednesday and Thursday to cut them down from 4 till 2. Now, in joint third place are James Cleverly and Tom Tugendhat. I'd be very surprised if Tom Tugendhat doesn't go out next week. But the question is a big question about James Cleverly, because I think a lot of the MPs, certainly I've been speaking to, aren't too much in favour of Kemi Badenoch versus Robert Jenrick, because they're both fishing from some of the same pool. My thought, and certainly talking to a lot of members, and the polling would bear this out, is that if Kemi Badenoch gets to the final 2, she will win. But the question is whether she does or not. So I think there's a slight aspect of stop Kemi at the moment, and I think the most likely scenario from the MPs anyway is probably Cleverly versus Jenrick, which is a very different type of contest. But you have the members, the association members, the chairman and the volunteers pressing their MPs, of course, here at the party conference, listening to those speeches and lots of different fringe events and other sorts of Q&As and so on, pressing their members. But whether the members actually change their mind or not, well, that's another matter. Well,
indeed, and again, it's a secret ballot as well. You know, a member can say, MPs say, well, I'm voting for you. They can set all 4 candidates, can't they? But the interesting thing is, of course, is whether MPs are voting for the person they think is the best candidate to lead the party among Tory members, among the general population who get the final say if there's a general election, or best for them. Are they going to be offered a job in the shadow cabinet, possible future cabinet?
Exactly.
But it's interesting seeing that poll, seeing that because Kemi Badenoch was believed, and you know, you look at the polls around the actual party membership. Again, difficult to know. It's a very small group of people, you know, under 100,000 probably, and to poll that, you know, a representative sample of those people is pretty hard. The pollsters have made it clear to us. But she had supposedly an 18-point lead back in August, now down to a 4-point lead over Robert Jenrick. So
he's closed the gap very convincingly.
He really has. Which, I mean, again, I suppose that's the argument, isn't it, for this longer battle, this longer timeline, to actually see, you know, how people perform over a longer period. In terms of the message that they're getting across, though, is there any evidence that the Tories are getting to grip as a party with why they lost? Because there's no doubt at all, when you look at the stats, Labour didn't win the election in that sense. They got a massive majority of MPs, but they got way lower than they'd expected to get in terms of the actual number of voters, 34%. They got fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn won in 2019. This wasn't a, oh, thank God the Labour Party are in for most voters. It was, thank God the Tories are out. Is there any idea that they got to grips with what it was they did wrong and what they can do better to get those votes back, not just from those who've gone to Reform or maybe some to the Lib Dems, but also those many millions who just simply sat at home and didn't bother voting at all?
Stayed at home. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, Julie. Actually, Tom Tugendhat mentioned this at some length, actually, yesterday in his Q&A, and he talked about how Labour's vote is wide, but it's not very deep. It's pretty shallow, actually, in a lot of those constituencies, as Reform found to their cost, and would say this and have said that, you know, their voter management wasn't nearly as good as the bigger, more sophisticated parties. Nigel Farage even has talked about the Liberal Democrats and how they managed their vote. They got 3.5 million votes and 72 MPs. Reform got 4.1 million votes and only 5 MPs. So certainly the Conservatives understand the mathematics. Whether they understand the sentiment and the anger that's out there, certainly James Cleverly, I was talking to him last night, and he was saying that, look, we dropped the ball essentially, and I sort of made the point, look, it's a bit more than that. It's a bit more than, people do feel betrayed, and they voted for Labour to some degree for a bit of change over the last 12 weeks or so. Has there really been that change in terms of the sleaze rows that are around Keir Starmer? And also, how do the Conservatives oppose as well? And that's a big question because a lot of them are talking, I feel anyway, the four of them are talking as if they're saying, well, when I'm Prime Minister, I'll do this. The strong likelihood is they will not be Prime Minister, and the strong likelihood is that certainly for the next 4 years, 4.5 years anyway, they'll be opposing. So being an opposer is a tough thing. It's a very different thing to being Prime Minister. Labour were quite good at it. Certain people like Yvette Cooper, I would argue, were quite good at it. But actually governing, as they're finding, is more difficult. And the Conservatives have the problem in the opposite direction, where they're getting used to opposition, what that actually looks like and what they can actually achieve during that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask you about another story? Well, it relates to Northern Ireland, as people could probably gather from your accent. The story about Belfast today. You've heard about this cruise ship that's been stuck there for 4 months, supposed to set sail way back in September. No, scheduled to leave on the 30th of May for the first leg of its cruise. This is the Villa V Residences Odyssey. People basically moving like their homes onto this cruise ship. Basically had a whole load of problems. It's been delayed, needing repairs. Finally set sail yesterday after months of delays. Guess what? Returning to port this afternoon at 1:30 because it needs more repairs.
I saw that story. Yeah.
What do you make of it?
I actually interviewed a woman who was on that cruise ship on Saturday. She was there with her cat, Captain the cat, and she'd been living in a hotel. She'd been to the Giant's Causeway a couple of times. As I think, I'm sure I won't offend the people of Northern Ireland when I say that sometimes it feels like Northern Ireland. It's a bit like Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never really leave.
Absolutely. And can I just finally, while I've got you, I can't resist this, can I get you on the biggest debate that is dividing the nation right now, and that is, where are you on the BBC Strictly row? Are you Team Amanda or Team Giovanni?
I honestly haven't a clue, Julia. I'm on the team that you're on, whichever that is, because I mean, I know that Giovanni is quite a controversial character. I don't know much about Amanda, but listen, I only really watched Strictly Come Dancing when Anne Widdecombe was on it, and that's about my quality of dancing, really. John Sargent and Anne Widdecombe.
Oh, now that's going to be worth testing at some point, Peter Cobb. I'll leave you to the sequence and joy and fake tan of a Tory party conference. Thank you very much indeed for that. Tom Slater. It is interesting. Like, do you think the Tories have got to grips at all? Not with the Strictly report for the BBC, but got to grips at all with why they lost?
I think they get it, because I think it was obvious to almost anyone why it had actually happened.
You'd be surprised with politicians.
I mean, maybe they don't understand.
Well, you just pointed out James Cleverly saying, "Oh, it's because we shouldn't have promised to stop the boats because we couldn't stop the boats."
Oh yeah,
that's not the problem, James.
That was ridiculous. But even I mean, and I think it's another reminder as to why he's never going to win this contest.
You think he's not? I mean, a lot of people are saying he may be the dark horse.
Maybe. I mean, these things. There's often a lot of chicanery in these things, but I think whoever is perceived to be the more right-wing candidate will win with the members almost certainly, and it's very unlikely to be him unless it's a kind of Tugendhat Cleverly stitch-up, which is incredibly unlikely. I mean, even to the extent that, like, Tom Tugendhat is now pledging to leave the European Court of Human Rights. There's a recognition that on where the issues are, but I think what they lack is less the full diagnosis of where we went wrong. I think that's been obvious to almost anyone. It's just whether or not you've got a credible, compelling enough of a character to take that message forward. That's where the jury's still out, I think.